But if they do not abolish stamp duty, we will know that really they're not prepared to walk the walk. COVID changed the playing field dramatically.
What politician dare go into it and say you aren't productive enough?
You can't do anything about the public service.
Well, we can.
Any government who has a tenure less than 10 years has got a real problem making change.
Public sector productivity in the UK is catastrophically negative. What could have been on Brexit might just all be lost.
Welcome to Talking Markets. I'm Michael Wilson. I'm joined by my good friend and colleague for many, many years, David Buick. David.
Greetings.
I'm very pleased to say that we're joined on this podcast by Lord Michael Spencer of Alresford. You are beyond doubt a part of the city establishment, if I can put it like that. People will remember from ICAP.
Don't go over the top, please, Michael. You'll embarrass me.
You know what I mean.
I'll start blushing.
So you were also Conservative Party Treasurer as well. How do you feel elections going so far? I know we're a bit early in.
We are early into the election, relatively early into the election, but obviously it's been a terrible, terrible start for the Conservative Party. It couldn't have been made up. Crowned with a tragedy, catastrophe really in many ways, appalling misjudgment by Rishi and his team to bring him back from the D-Day 80th anniversary no less celebrations, an appalling lack of judgment and a colossal error that has cost him and indeed the party very considerable credibility, exactly at the time, of course, when Farage has just announced that he is standing for Clacton, taken over the leadership of the Reform Party. It couldn't have been a better gift to the Reform Party.
Do you think, Michael, that the number of votes for Farage and the Reform Party, which, if you listen to Sir John Curtis and other people, could be in excess of what the Tories could poll, though it won't be illustrated in the form of seats, but it is surely going to hand a greater majority to the Labour Party than it would otherwise?
Of course, Reform will take more voters from the Conservatives than they will Labour.
Yeah.
So the success of Reform, and I think it's premature to forecast that they will get more votes than the Conservatives. To be honest with you, I think that is actually unlikely.
I hope so. You're right.
Me too. Undoubtedly, the Conservatives will suffer more from Reform, and the bookmakers at the moment are betting the Conservatives will win less than 100 seats in this election, the lowest number in history, I think, for the Conservative Party. Notwithstanding that, the bookmakers think it is unlikely that the Reform will get into double figures and probably at best into low single figures.
Yes, I've heard 5.
So it's an extraordinary election campaign, an election so far we're seeing, and of course Starmer has just sat back and said thank you very much indeed. Seeing the blunders made by the Conservatives coupled with Reform turning up, Farage taking over leadership of Reform, running for Clacton. He's not even certain, of course, to winning Clacton. I'm not saying he won't win it, by the way.
Charles Watling's a pretty popular bloke, though.
Yes, so I mean, Starmer himself, a very average leader by any normal consideration, appears to be headed for a landslide, which he frankly doesn't deserve on any critical analysis of the situation.
How do you rate the people sitting next to him on a supposed Labour front bench?
I think the Labour Party, by the way, Starmer himself and many, not all, many of his cohorts, particularly Angela Rayner, are really quite left-wing. Yeah. I think Starmer has done a major makeover of his political external appearances, encouraged and led, no doubt, by Tony Blair and Peter Mandelson, who've done a very effective job explaining to him, if you want to win this election, my dear fellow, don't go into it as a left-wing lawyer. You need to represent that you've moved to the centre ground, that you're pro-business, pro-enterprise, all those things that Tony Blair was in favour of. And they have done that very well, and Starmer is a chameleon in this respect. But I think when he gets into power, we will discover that what he says and what he pronounces and what they have been claiming will be steadily dropped by the wayside. No doubt they will say, we've seen the books and they're terrible and we're going to have to adopt emergency measures here. And I think it's going to be a very interesting and very worrisome time, actually, for the UK.
I mean, we know that Messrs. Reeves, Reynolds, Jones and Siddiqui have done what I call the smoked salmon round amongst the business community and have done a lot of listening, and they seem to feel, the City of London, from what I've heard, relatively comfortable with them, because I think there's little damage they can do for 6 months, but with a huge majority. Do you think they're the kind of people, Michael, that are going to bring in incentive for business, you know, attracting outside investment that we so desperately need? You don't?
No. I mean, there's no... The sort of things that they need to do to attract international investment are the sort of things which, frankly, to be honest with you, the Conservative Party ought to have done and have not.
Couldn't agree more.
And is one of the reasons we are where we are from the Conservative Party's point of view. Will they cut corporation tax? No. Will they raise it? My money would be they will raise it. They will say it's a temporary rise, but my experience is temporary rises from politicians their definition of temporary is not the same as mine or yours. So they will increase corporation tax, I would imagine. I fully expect them to do something about capital gains tax.
Yep.
They will probably harmonise capital gains tax with income tax, which will be a disaster in terms of domestic investment or encouraging domestic investment in the stock market, for example. They certainly won't abolish stamp duty, I doubt very much, on share trading. Again, something the Tories should have done. But let's look forward perhaps a bit more than we look back. And Rachel Reeves says that they are going to do everything to get companies to list in London, but I haven't heard any detail of exactly what it is she's going to do to get, apart from extend the smoked salmon or prawn cocktail circuit, which they have done pretty well. One of the key things, of course, that they need to do is to change what had really happened 25 years ago, which is this significant move by the pension industry for putting its money into fixed income as opposed to equities. That needs to be reversed. And that is an essential to get capital flowing back into the listed equity market, but also all the benefits that extend out from that as well.
We've talked about this before, haven't we? How on earth do you bully pension funds to shift into equities? How do you do that?
Well, we can follow what the Australians have done, for example, set up create big pension fund groups that specifically invest a committed proportion. I can't remember what it is, but I'm guesstimating, I think something like 40% of their assets go domestically into the Australian stock market. This has been very well received from the pension fund beneficiaries, because in the long run, the evidence is overwhelming. In the long run, the lifetime of a pension being typically 30 to 40 years, the equity markets have always outperformed the fixed income markets. And so the benefit of this to the Australian pensioner is that the performance of his fund is vastly superior. Equally, it supports the Australian stock market, which improves the economy in Australia. It's a win-win all around, and we need to do something similar in the UK, and fast.
But unless we're going to get the risk appetite to return, if Labour or any other government doesn't see that what they have to do in order to attract investment, I put it to you, this is clearly not going to happen. The other reason that worries me slightly, that if you look at the US markets, if you strip out about 5 stocks, underneath the soft belly of the US equity market is not great at the moment, and the debt, when you consider how the United States has gone, I don't know, from something like 24 trillion to 33 trillion in double quick time, I would suggest in a current market where politically life isn't as stable as well, is quite worrying. No?
Well, I mean, the US is a very different story.
But it affects other markets.
Of course it does.
Yeah.
In the UK, the US has been a country which has been pro-success, pro-enterprise, pro-investment, pro-people making money. It celebrates the success of entrepreneurs who become multimillionaires, even billionaires. And this is the genesis why companies like Google and Apple and the many others,
NVIDIA and all those sort of things, yeah,
are all in the United States, and we see sadly rather less of that. Well, not for a lot less of that in this country. We don't celebrate great enterprise and great commercial success in this country in the way that we ought to, and for the benefit of our own economy.
Do you feel? I mean, I know your answer to this is going to be yes, but just
Yes.
let's just explore it a little. I mean, the dearth of IPOs in London is pretty obvious, isn't it? And yet, a lot of them don't necessarily work in the way that they're planned, and so on. Are we missing out? And do you see a possible Labour government trying to make London more attractive for more IPOs?
Well, they've talked about it, and Rachel Reeves has said publicly many times, "I'm here to support the city." But it's one thing talking the talk; it's the other thing walking the walk.
Yeah.
And I mean, at its very basic level, at its basic entry-level, O-level question is, how can you have a successful stock market if you have stamp duty on share transactions? London is the only major market in the world that still has stamp duty on share transactions, not for every market participant, but certainly from a private client point of view. And private clients, small investors, medium-sized investors, individuals supporting the market is an important critical mass for an effective marketplace. And we've had that again. It should have been abolished years ago by the Conservatives, another debate. But if they do not abolish stamp duty, we will know that really they're not prepared to walk the walk. Because stamp duty means there's more friction in share transaction. More friction in share transactions mean, funnily enough, volume of turnover is lower. Astonishing, isn't that? Volume of turnover means your stock market stocks are less liquid. Investors pay a premium for liquid markets, therefore they pay a discount for illiquid markets. Therefore, ergo, if you list in London, you will have a lower rating per force because of that simple economic fact than if you list in any other exchange in the world. That is one of the reasons, not the only one, but one key reason why our marketplace has failed. On top of that, as I said, is the fact that we need to encourage much greater investment by pension funds into UK equities on a long-term basis. It's the right thing for the pensioners, right thing for the pension funds, right thing for the nation. So there you are.
Right. Now, I'd like to just develop a variation on this theme. I think stripping Sheen out, because a lot of people think we shouldn't have it anyway, and only 1 billion out of 50 billion going to private investor or to investors strikes me as a bit of a joke. But we should be focusing on small, medium-sized enterprises, which there is a huge number in this country, which will add to the technological revolution that we're going to go forward. And you, Michael, bless you, have done so much for what I call the small or aspiring company. I mean, you've had some wonderful companies like Chapel Down, Glasswall, all doing well. You've had insurance businesses in the Far East that have done. You've focused brilliantly. Why don't other people follow your advice? Not necessarily your advice, but your ideas, because the risk-reward ratio seems to have collapsed in this country.
Well, I agree with you on much of what you said, but not necessarily all of it. There are a lot of startups in the UK.
Yeah.
And
I love them.
The UK have got companies like Revolut, for example, which is an outstanding example, and a very, very, very fine one. But not just Revolut, there are many others out there. However, we still need a longer term support function for those companies, because they all get to a point where they think, one, we need more capital.
Yep.
And is the UK the best place to raise capital? No, not really. We don't have the UK. We're great at service industries.
Yep.
We are not great at capital industries. This country has shooed away the non-doms. A catastrophic decision, in my opinion. That although we can understand at a political level it looks attractive, will deeply damage our long-term economy, because we are basically saying to a large number of very wealthy people, a significant number of billionaires, you are not really welcome to live in this country. Every other country, not every, many other countries have now got their own non-dom offering, saying thank you very much, UK, well done, you're chasing these people out. Italy will have some, Portugal will have some, you know, the usual Monaco, Channel Islands, Isle of Man. So they will all disappear, and with them will go their capital, of course. I mean, they will take their capital with them, and they won't be spending their money in the shops. Their wives won't be spending their money. They won't be buying their paintings at Sotheby's. And the knock on there has been a woeful lack of understanding by our political elite, and might I add, the Exchequer, in realizing that it is not simply the tax that they are paying or not paying. It is the whole ancillary ripple effect, which is very, very considerable, that we are losing. And a lot of people have said that they've already noticed in London. Restaurant takes are down, the shops, I mean, shops are not as busy. By the way, the tourist tax is another thing. But coming back to what we were talking about earlier, the UK is not great at capital raising. We're not a nation that supports people who have capital. As I said, I expect capital gains tax, in my opinion, is already higher than it should be. It was 19% a few years ago. I think that's a sustainable and acceptable level. It's now 25%. I fear it will go up under Labour. And so we will not be a country where capital raising exercises are easily achieved. And this will cost us all those companies like Revolut, who, when they list, will not, sadly, list in London. And we talk about Klarna coming to London, although, of course, it's not a British company. It's a Swedish company, and a very good one. But they won't list in London. They'll go to the United States as well.
Yeah. There is... Let's presuppose there is a rise of populism in Europe, and we've seen Macron calling a snap election and all the rest of it. If it is likely that rise in populism happens, and if we do get a Labour government, we could have a British government which is diametrically opposed to almost every other nation within Europe, probably almost diametrically opposed to some of the more emerging nations in the rest of the world. That has to be a worry. Now, you know, we take on board everything that you've said. I seem to remember, don't you, that most elections sort of, you know, there's always this kind of, oh, it's worse than it was. Where are they going to get the money from? It's the same with the budgets, isn't it? Is this worse now? Because I was listening to the chap from the IFS a few days ago saying there's no point in me coming on this programme and talking about the fact that there's not a load of money around. Of course there isn't. There never is, you know. It's the way it is. You've got to be inventive.
That's not entirely fair. I mean, this is another interesting contrast, isn't it? Because the last time Labour came into power from opposition in 1997, Tony Blair, obviously Prime Minister, not a leftist, by the way, a very centrist individual. They inherited an economy which was in very, very considerably better condition than even they realised. I mean, anecdotally, there's a famous story of Gordon Brown on arrival into the Treasury is briefed by his officials saying, and at the end of it they say, Chancellor, the news is that the financial affairs of the nation are very, very much better than you realised beforehand. And he said, well, what do you want me to do? Shall I send him a letter of thank you? And that apparently is a very, actually, I missed out a few components of vigorous words in that. But and so they inherited a very good economy then and a good balance sheet. That is not the case today. You might say that part of that has been Conservative ineptitude, and I think Conservative Party in 14 years in power should have done a much better job, but not making excuses. COVID was changed the playing field dramatically and changed the nation's balance sheet, not ours, but every nation in the world's balance sheet, dramatically for the worst. The irony is, had Labour been in power, frankly, they would have been even more evangelical about lockdown. They would have locked down much more strongly than Boris Johnson. They would have done actually a much worse job with the economy than Boris Johnson and the Conservatives did. But nevertheless, the electorate don't factor that into their thinking, and they don't really care. And to an extent, that's tant pis, isn't it? And, you know, that's how politics is.
I'd like, because we've got this situation now where all we hear from Labour now is no tax in the three areas, I think, the VAT, the capital gains and the...
no, they didn't say capital gains.
No, it's not capital gains, sorry, corporation tax and also income tax. Nonetheless, the public sector does not work, period. Somebody's got to find some money from somewhere, and unless they can actually generate growth, which I have extreme doubts about, we're going to have some sort of taxation. But it really brings me to the next thing, which
actually, can I just say one thing?
Yeah, do.
And before we generate growth, I think Rishi was mistaken to go for a July election.
Oh, terrible.
I mean, we now know for certain. But even at the time, I thought it was a premature move. The economy is beginning to improve in the UK.
Yeah.
And we've been through a pretty bleak run, in fairness. So we kind of deserve some sort of recovery and bounce back.
Yeah.
And I think that is taking place. So actually, the good fortune of Starmer, not only by the bungles of his opponents in the electoral campaign, but also when he arrives in Downing Street on the morning of the 5th of July, no doubt triumphant and happy and smiling and celebrating and all the rest of it, he will be told, actually, Prime Minister, the good news is there is a bounce in the economy. But a bounce is not the same thing as a sustainable period of growth. And that I fear is going to be much more difficult to achieve. And largely because one of the problems that Labour face is they believe they can spend money better than the private sector. There is no evidence this has ever been the case in government whatsoever. And as you know, public sector productivity in the UK is catastrophically negative. You know, so nearly 50% of our economy, not actually, it's between 40 and 45% is public sector. That has negative productivity growth of somewhere between -1% and -2%. That means the other half of the economy has got to perform extraordinarily well, twice as well, to get us, to get us to any form of what 2% growth rate means. That half got to do about +4. 4% growth rate's normal in America. For us, we'd be grateful to have 2%. And the tragedy is that Labour will think the solutions to our problems are to spend more money on public services, though the evidence is that that money will be poorly spent if anything to do with historic comparison is to go by. And look at the National Health Service. I mean, we've thrown more money at this year after year after year after year for what productivity increase?
Zero.
None at all. No, actually, not only none, negative.
Negative. I think it's 110 million to 165 billion.
I mean, this is the centre of it, isn't it? Who dare go into the National Health Service? What politician dare go into it and say you aren't productive enough? And it is the most siloed place I have ever seen. Doctors, consultants, anaesthetists, nurses, management. You know, they don't talk to each other. I know this, and I happen to live in a place near a very good hospital in Hampshire. But I speak to retired medical anaesthetists and consultants and so on, and they say, do you know what? We can't even get the details up on the computer. That computer system was put in 25 years ago, and it still doesn't work properly. These are the most basic things. So free at the point of care depends where you go.
I can't pretend I have any expertise to offer how to amend the National Health Service, but one thing for sure, continuing the status quo of throwing more money at it every year, hoping things will improve, has been tried and tried again. And as they say, the definition of lunacy is trying the same thing again and again and again and expecting a different outcome.
No.
And that is the case about throwing money at the National Health Service. And indeed, the whole of the public sector needs a proper, thorough review. As a starting point, how can we have a public sector where the civil service think that working from home, turning up to the office 2 days a week is an adequate
And the Home Office, only 40% turn up anyway.
I mean, it's outrageous. It's astonishing. It is terrifying, actually. I mean,
but you can't do anything about the public service.
Well, we can.
Well, any government who has a tenure less than 10 years has got a real problem making change. Now, we've got Sue Gray representing...
Well, can I just stop you there?
Yeah, sorry.
Any government less than 10 years has a problem making change. Herein lies one of the problems. Therefore, every new incoming government thinks, I won't take any of the hard decisions.
Exactly.
I won't take any of the hard decisions because they might be unpopular in the short run. And I won't see the benefit for the long run. So I won't take those decisions now, I'll wait a while. And so obviously the difficult decisions never get taken. And indeed this is, I'm afraid to say, you want my honest opinion,
I do.
Part of the tragedy of the 14 years in Tory rule. They were unwilling or unable to take some of the hard decisions early on. In the first 5 years under Osborne and Cameron, of course, they were cosily ensconced with the Lib Dems, which they constrained, but I suspect they were quite happy to be constrained from doing any radical stuff. But apart from education,
they cut 600,000 people out of the public sector. This is a conversation I had with James Sassoon, who was in the Lords at the time representing. And I thought that was, in a period, I think it was 2 years, was pretty impressive. But it didn't seem to have any effect at all, Michael.
Well, except for improving the amount of money, reducing the amount of money we're spending on
I agree, but then the system became totally inefficient.
There are many other things they failed to do, though. I mean, talking about some of the economic reforms we just mentioned to now, and also introducing the ring fencing of banking, which, in my opinion, was one of the truly catastrophic economic decisions that they took. But so the governments, sadly, so often defer the difficult decisions in the early stage because they don't feel they get the benefit for several years. But that's exactly what should not happen, but it does. And I find it amazing, of course, when you hear politicians complain that financial investors are far too short-term, the city is too short-term. The most short-term people in this place are the blithering politicians themselves.
Yeah.
Would you like a quickie?
I would, yeah. I don't know how to take that, but to just sort of find out, I've got to ask one thing. Brexit. Now, we know it's delivered in name. It's not been delivered properly. Do you think Starmer will try and water it down even more? And how damaging do you think the whole process might be?
This, of course, depends where you come from.
Yeah.
I mean, for those frustrated Remainers, of whom there are many, who look back and have convinced themselves that that referendum was the greatest catastrophe that befell the UK, and there are many in that category.
I know.
Still, notwithstanding the fact that Europe has gone, if you weren't a member of Europe, I wouldn't be wanting to join it now anyway, whatever you're... But they will see Starmer as the route to re-establishing a sort of EU-like membership. Yes, they've already said they want freedom of movement. What that means to our ability to control immigration, another complex issue, by the way, and we've done a pretty rubbish job on that. But what it'll do to our ability to control immigration will evaporate with that. And freedom of movement will be followed, no doubt, by a whole series of other things to re-establish a much closer connection with the EU, and therefore the whole basis of the whole core premise of Brexit will be lost, really.
And also, I mean, it's likely, if we look at what's happened in not only France but Germany, Poland, even Hungary, Holland, Belgium, all going to the right, it's unlikely that Prime Minister Starmer, if he gets there, he's going to have much rapport with them.
Well, so it's true that some of those, I mean, the election outcome in France is very interesting.
Yeah.
But Macron would be cozying up very considerably to Starmer, I suspect, and Schulz as well. I mean, the Europeans mainly can believe that it was a very bad outcome for Europe that the UK left the EU. And it was, by the way. It was.
No,
it was bad.
No, I get that.
It was, and so they will, I think, and one of the reasons they've given us a good kicking when we left is pour discourager les autres from going down the same route. So they will, to an extent, welcome Starmer and Labour to return closer to the fold, not rejoining, but closer to the fold. And that will really mean that our ability to, which you know, we haven't done really hitherto, to really think of what could have been on Brexit might just all be lost.
Michael, thank you very much indeed for joining us. It's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you, hasn't it?
Fantastic. Somewhat depressing, but I love hearing what you've got to say.
The future, always look to it with the glass half full.
Half full. That's the way. That's
Thank you so much.
That's a good one to conclude on. This has been Talking Markets, and see you again soon.